one of the fada'il, one of the great virtues of the Quran also, and maybe this might be one of the last ones I share, is that Allah has made this Quran such that it ends up causing some people to be raised, their statuses to be raised, and other people, their statuses to fall, just because of the way they end up treating this Quran. Okay? So what does that mean? That means that as Muslims, we should honor the people of the Quran. Okay? Honor the people who recite the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. Honor the people who spend time learning the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. Honor the people who ended up taking it upon themselves to memorize the Quran, to commit the Quran to their memories, to learn the tafsir of the Quran, to teach the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. Because the Prophet ﷺ said Allah raises some people, right, with this. And the reason why it's important to note over here, one may say, okay, but Allah raises people. He's not telling us to honor these people, right? But the way the Sahaba, they understood this hadith. Because one day, Umar ibn Khattab, and he's a reporter of the hadith itself, and he had met his governor of Mecca, named Nafi'. And when he met Nafi' in Asfan, he said to Nafi', who have you left as a vice while you are away? So Nafi' said, I left Ibn Abza. And he said, who's Ibn Abza? He said, Ibn Abza is a man who happened to be a slave who's been freed. Okay? He's from our mawali, meaning he's from the people who were slaves. Right? Remember, at that time, slavery was still prevalent. Islam didn't come and abolish slavery, but it came and dealt with slavery in a equitable way. Okay? And that's why we know that within Muslim civilizations you had slaves who had various statuses, like this one right over here. He's a governor, right? And also Islam provided many avenues to free slaves as well. Okay? And that's why when it became international law to abolish slavery, it was very easy for Muslims around the world to cope with it, because we already believed in the idea of freedom of slavery, but it was not constituted as a complete law. Okay? So Ibn Abza, he says he was from the Mawali. So Umar ibn Khattab got a bit angry at this. He said that you ended up taking a Mawla and you made him the governor of Mecca. Subhanallah. How could you do such a thing? He got a little bit angry, Umar ibn Khattab, at this. So Nafi' responded back to him. He said that he is a reciter of the Quran, and he's a scholar of the inheritance law. Okay? So at that, when Umar al-Khattabi heard this, he said, as for this, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَرْفَعُ بِهَذَا الْقُرْآنِ أَقْوَامًا وَيَضَعُ بِهِ آخَرِينَ. Allah Azza wa Jal raises because of this book people, and He ends up taking away the status of others because they ended up neglecting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can have a great lineage, you can be from the Ahlul Bayt, but you are a person who completely neglected the Quran. Another person who perhaps has no lineage in Islam except maybe he's a first generation Muslim. That person, if he memorizes the Quran and he sticks to it and he spends time with it, he will be great. He should be greater. He should be honored in a greater way than a person who says, oh, I'm from the children of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because of that you should give me a greater honor. No, because this is a Mawla in Mecca, of all places, where the relatives of Rasulullah are first generations over there still, right? And Nafi' ends up making him the leader of, governor of Mecca. More than that, we know that Ata, he used to also be from the slaves as well. And he was freed and he became the mufti of Mecca, right? Why? Because he was a person who had the knowledge of the Quran. He was a faqih. He had a person, if he wasn't a reciter of the Quran, so to speak, but he had knowledge of the meanings of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the ability to become part of the legacy of this Quran by learning the Quran, reciting the Quran, okay, and reciting and understanding the meanings of the Quran as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about something related here. Now, we know that reciting the Quran is rewarding, okay? That's something that we can obviously see within these hadith that we discussed. And we'll discuss some more as well, perhaps. But simultaneously, understanding the book of Allah Azza wa Jal is also very, very rewarding. And one of the common questions that people have about the understanding of the book of Allah Azza wa Jal is that, look, I'm not a person who's an Arab. I don't understand how to read Arabic. I don't know how to speak Arabic. I've never learned it. And I really, frankly, don't really care to learn as well. Meaning I don't have the time in my life to be able to learn the entire language of the Arabs for me to know what Allah is directly saying. You say, fair enough. But firstly, but I still want to learn the meanings of the Quran. So how do I do that in that case, right? So what we have to understand is that there's different layers of the meanings of the words of Allah Azza wa Jal. It's not all one layer. There's 4 different layers that Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu had mentioned. He mentioned that there's 4 different levels of the meanings of the Quran. He said that وَجْهٌ تَعْرِفُهُ الْعَرَبُ مِنْ كَلَامِهَا. That one of the levels of the understanding of the Quran is such that the Arabs know simply by their language, they're able to understand that. And another wajh is one that only the ulama know. Because they're the depths of the Quran, they're the ahkam of the Quran, the rulings that the Quran produces, right? And then there's another level of knowledge that everyone is obliged to know. Not that they have the liberty to know. They have to know. Okay? So within this capacity, you don't have the liberty. You have to learn it. It's not a choice. You will be only fulfilling your obligation by learning the meanings of the Quran. The 4th level is a meaning that no one knows except for Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal. وَجْهٌ اسْتَأْثَرَ اللَّهُ بِعِلْمِهِ. An angle of the understanding of the Quran that Allah Azza wa Jal has chosen to keep away from anyone. Okay? That's وَجْهٌ اسْتَأْثَرَ اللَّهُ بِعِلْمِهِ. So what is that angle of understanding that all of us have to know? Okay? That is the primary meanings of the Quran, which can be understood pretty much in every language. This is not something that you need to be a scholar for to understand. This is not something that you need to be anything really. You pick up the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says pray, you know what that means. It means to pray. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah talks about the Jannah, Allah talks about the Nar, you can understand it in English, you can understand it in Japanese, in Chinese, in Malay, in Hindi, every language you can understand these primary meanings from, right? So these meanings are quite clear, and they are quite readily there in the Quran. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the ability to take lessons from this meaning. Allahumma ameen ya Rabb. Another one of the fada'il of the Quran, the virtues of the Quran, is that the Prophet ﷺ said, اقرأوا القرآن, read the Quran, فإنه يأتي يوم القيامة شفيعا لأصحابه. That on the day of judgment, Allah Azza wa Jal will send the Quran as a shafi', as an interceder on behalf of the people who end up reading the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the more you read the Quran, the more Allah will allow this to be a means for you to be purged on the day of judgment by the intercession of the Quran. And what does it mean that the Quran will intercede? Okay? The scholars, they said there are 2 possibilities, and both of them are equally possible. And I'm mentioning both possibilities for a reason, because some people, they find it difficult in this in the world that we're living in today, which everything has to be tangible. They find some things unbelievable. Okay, so it's possible that this could be that Allah Azza wa Jal gives the Quran a specific form, and it literally speaks and says this individual used to read me like this and this much. And it's also equally possible that this particular hadith is actually a majaz, it's a metaphor. And what that means is, it's metaphorically saying that the angels who were writing down the fact that he is reciting the Quran regularly, he will be the one, they will be the ones that will go and intercede and say, we heard him reciting the Quran, oh Allah. Right? And Ibn al-Malak, from the ulama of al-hadith, he wrote this in his explanation, saying that both of these happen to be possibilities. I ask Allah again to grant us the tawfiq to practice and to convey. I'm going to leave you off in one hadith. I know I said that about the one before it and also the one before it and but inshallah this will be the last one. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man shaghalahu al-Qur'an wa dhikri an mas'alati a'taytuhu afdala ma u'ti as-sa'ilin." That whoever becomes occupied with my remembrance, with the Qur'an and with my remembrance, he gets occupied from what? He gets occupied from even asking me. Okay? So now we always are wondering about how is it that I can have my du'as answered by Allah Azza wa Jalla, right? It's a common question people have. What do I do to get my du'as answered by Allah? And then we have a list of adab, etiquettes that normally an answer would entail. And I have written actually a book on this called Granted, 100 traditions on how to have your du'a accepted. But still people have this question. They say, why, how do I get my du'a accepted, right? One of those ways actually is this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said that whoever gets occupied by the Qur'an and by my remembrance, from what? From asking me, I will grant to him the greatest of what I would grant to people that go and ask me questions. Meaning, a person who asks Allah Azza wa Jal may get the absolute best response, and he may get less of that and he may get lesser than that. But the one who spends his time with the book of Allah, Allah Azza wa Jal will grant him that which if he were to ask, the best response that Allah could get, he would get that without asking. Because he's constantly occupied with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That doesn't mean you never ask Allah, but that means that you focus also on worshipping Allah more so than spending time asking Allah. Although asking Allah is also a form of worship. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the tawfiq to practice, to convey, inshallah. If there's any questions now, if there are any questions now, I'll take them, inshallah.